with Montana Angler, and we're here today on one of Paradise Valley's famous spring creeks. And we're going to talk a little bit about nymph fishing the spring creeks. This is day in and day out the most effective technique on the creeks. If there's not an active hatch or a lot of terrestrials on the water, fish are going to feed subsurface. Often trout will be very concentrated in deeper slots, and nymphing is one of the best ways to target those fish. One of the most important elements in your nymphing game when you're on the creeks is finding high concentrations of trout. Spring creeks have very cold water. Trout don't like to be in fast water unless they're actively feeding. So a lot of times we're going to look for deeper troughs, such as the one that's in front of us here, and that'll hold trout that are resting or casually feeding, and that's where we're going to have our most success finding large groups of fish. One of the most important elements of spring creek fishing when you're nymphing is the angle of your cast. Again, these trout are not going to move very far to take their flies. I like to cast slightly upstream in the current, let those flies drift past my location, and then swing just below me. This is the optimum location for detecting strikes, which are going to be very subtle because the fish will often just move a few inches to take their nymphs. Another tip when you're nymph fishing spring creeks is to pay attention to your position within the creek itself. A lot of anglers make the mistake of standing one place and extending casts and peppering their casts in every direction. A better approach is to move your position within the spring creek to find just the right angle where the geometry of your cast swings into play right where the fish are with the perfect angle on the hook set. If you move your body around, you'll have a better success rate when you nymph fish. True to our theme of spring creek trout not having to move very far to feed, when we're fishing, if you're gonna fish an indicator, I like to use a very subtle yarn indicator. I hand cut mine and use a slip knot so that I can adjust the length. I frequently trim the indicator to different sizes so that it just barely floats the weight I'm fishing. I also move it up and down. You can pull it out, do another slip knot up and down the leader. Typically, I'll start with a shallow rig to try to pick off any opportunistic fish and then go slightly deeper. It's also important to frequently change your split shot if you're going to fish any split shot at all. If you're fishing skinny weed beds, no weight at all is necessary. You're going to fish a deeper trough like this one, maybe a single small split shot, possibly two. Because the water often is not that swift, we can get away with a small amount of weight and still submerge our flies to the correct depth. But changing your indicator length, changing your split shot, moving your body around, making these fine-tuned adjustments is really important. One final tip when we're fishing these high densities of trout in a spring creek is to make some frequent fly changes. Even if we're having success with one or two patterns, there are other fish that are probably refusing those same patterns. So if you pull 4 or 5 fish out of a slot, we know there's a lot of fish in there. Change it up. Put a midge larva on, switch to a PMD emerger or a beta emerger in the spring. Give them some new alternatives, and often you can pick up a few more trout out of the same run before moving on. While we all love to show up at a spring creek and cast dry flies to rising trout, the reality is most of the time, trout feed subsurface. If we pay attention to fine-tuning our nymphing game, we can have some great success on days when the trout are not rising.